In today's video, you will understand how God chooses you, or rather how He calls you to serve in His name. Like Jesus, He needs those who will spread His word, His teachings, and His love. This is an important moment because it is here that we guide our soul toward salvation or perdition. Sign number 1, an insatiable thirst for justice. Screwtape in one of his letters says the following: Our enemy God employs a vast arsenal of silent and direct communications to humans. He uses pleasures, music, beauty, quietness, and the subtle voices of nature to speak to their hearts. One of the most evident signs that God has called you is that you will have an incessant desire for the things of God. This happens because when God calls you, His primary objective is to renew your spirit. This will cause you to have a strong yearning for the things of God. Jesus said in Matthew 5 that you may find yourself starting to feel an impulse to read the Bible, listen to sermons, or interact with other believers. This is not just a passing interest. It is a deep passion that you cannot ignore. The reason why God does this is because He wants to communicate with your spirit, equipping you with the knowledge and power that you need. God communicates with us in various ways. Perhaps you are not noticing in your turbulent and monotonous life, as daily routines sometimes confuse us. But try to observe more closely. This is why moments of reflection in His Word are so important. They open our eyes to the divine. Sign number 2, you are easily convinced. Lewis says in his book, Mere Christianity, our perception of right and wrong is not just a social instinct. It is the voice of God whispering in our hearts, calling us to act justly and compassionately. When God is calling you, another obvious sign you will notice is that you always feel guilty when you do something wrong. When God calls you, the first thing He does is separate you from the nature of sin. So when you make a mistake, your conscience sharpens, and you will immediately feel a sense of remorse each time you do something wrong. Feeling strong conviction is a good thing. It means that the Spirit of God is actively trying to purify you and help you become a better person. In fact, the Bible talks about this in 2 Corinthians 7:10, which says, For godly sorrow produces repentance leading to salvation, not to be regretted, but the sorrow of the world produces death. Imagine that each of us carries within us an invisible compass guiding us between what is right and wrong. This is not a mere social construct. It is not simply a set of rules we learn from childhood. C.S. Lewis proposes that this inner voice, this perception of what is just and what is not, is actually the voice of God whispering in our hearts. This voice whispers in moments of decision, gently calling us to act with justice and compassion. Every right choice, every act of kindness is a response to this whisper, a harmonious dance with the divine that is deeply rooted in our nature. Rejoice, for God is with us. Sign number 3, you will lose friends. Lewis states in his book, Mere Christianity, every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you, the part that chooses, into something a little different than it was before. In taking your place beside Christ, who is greater than you, even if you can't see Him, will profoundly affect all the relationships you've ever had and will have. When God calls you, do not be surprised if your friends start to leave you. You may find that the people you used to have fun with simply do not seem to understand you anymore. They may begin to distance themselves from you or cut ties completely. This can be very difficult, especially because these are people you may have known for years. But the truth is, when God calls you, you will begin to see things differently, and your priorities will change. This happens because He does not want anyone to be a hindrance to your calling. In fact, even if He does not directly remove them, you may find that they will start to leave you alone. This is because the light in you repels the darkness in them. For example, in John 6, the Bible reports that many followers of Jesus walked away from Him and no longer walked with Him. And although it may be painful at first, know that it is for your good. So if you are going through this now, do not let it bring you down. Therefore, do not be alarmed by the changes. During this process, they are necessary for you to seek your place beside God. Some of these people will stay if your goals are similar, but it is natural for many to drift away. The path to salvation is individual in the end. Sign number 4, trials and temptations. No trial would have any value if it were easy to face. But God gives us the strength to face great challenges precisely because they are difficult. Through temptations, we learn to renounce the small things that imprison us. A clear sign that God has called you is that you will face an incredible amount of temptations. Many people believe that temptations suddenly disappear when God calls them, but this is a misconception. The level of trials and temptations will increase significantly. God's call in your life does not mean that the devil will leave you alone. In fact, you will face some of the most intense levels of temptation you have ever experienced. The devil intensifies this to try to make you fail and give up. Note that in Matthew 4, the Bible tells us that Jesus was led into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. If you are to serve God, you must be prepared for the times when you will be challenged. Indeed, people who have never offended you before may start to do so suddenly. This will be the time when your calling and your relationship with God will be tested. But you should not fear facing temptations. On the contrary, you should confront them with confidence, knowing that God is more than capable of delivering you from all forms of temptations. Screw tape reinforces this idea from a different angle. It is during periods of apparent spiritual desert that the patient is actually being prepared for the highest moments of his journey. Our task is to prevent him from realizing this. You can see that Lewis's mind is so insightful that he can tell us everything we need to know about trials and temptations from both his perspective and that of a demon. If your life is turbulent and full of temptations, you are on the right path. It is up to us to overcome these obstacles, and on our side we have God, with whom nothing is impossible. Indeed, it is with his words that we learn to fear no evil. Sign number 5, you will be clothed with authority. It is when we are most aware of our own frailty and feel most intensely that our ability comes from God that we are used by him in surprising ways. Our own insufficiency is transformed by his grace into a tool of his love. When God calls you, he will grant you great power. This power, which comes from above, will be accompanied by a high level of authority. However, this authority does not mean that you will be in charge of making demands. It is a different kind of authority, one that emanates from humility and grace. This means that you may find yourself doing things you normally would not do. You may wake up and suddenly feel compelled to preach or pray for someone. The Holy Spirit will begin to move within you, as he did with the apostles. You will not be in control of yourself and may find yourself laying hands on others to pray for them. You will not know why you are doing this, but you will feel this authority coming from above. Naturally, you may be very shy in real life, but when God calls you, you will discover that you become very eloquent and full of authority. You may find yourself standing before large crowds and speaking to people of all classes without feeling afraid. In the Bible, whenever God called someone, he spent time encouraging them to be brave and not to worry. Each of us has our own uniqueness, but when God calls you, it is because he has a great purpose for your life. Nothing will stop you from doing what you are commanded because he will lend you his strength, his wisdom, and bless your path. It is difficult to understand how God acts in our lives. But if you pay attention, on many occasions, in the most subtle ways, he gives us his signs. And when you are certain in your heart of what needs to be done, it is him giving you great power, the power of divine authority. Sign number 6, persecution. Screwtape in one of his letters tells us, our cause is never more promising than when all indicators suggest that we have no hope. Our greatest triumphs are always accompanied by a sense of crisis, for it is in crisis that our victories are shaped. God's call comes with glory, but this glory also brings adversity. When you position yourself as a representative of God, you are preparing for a life of persecution. You expose yourself to criticism and judgment. People who knew you before may be the first to doubt your intentions. They may even cast looks of contempt your way. Perhaps God is using you in ways that others cannot see, and they will be the first to rise against you, saying that you are not of God. But do not let this discourage you. Remember, you are not doing this for them. You are doing this because you feel a calling greater than yourself. Persecution is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. When you are called by God, you will have the strength to face anything in your path. You will have the courage to stand firm in your beliefs, even when others do not agree with you. In fact, if in your calling you do not face persecution, perhaps you should be concerned, for everyone called by God will face some level of persecution. You know why when we change to a life devoted to the Lord, many people change the way they treat us. It is because we are no longer of the world. We leave our old self behind. This attracts not only disapproving looks, but also persecution from people who want us back in sin or to be sinners. It is difficult for others to understand that a life dedicated to the Lord makes us happy because for them, happiness lies outside the church, in readings that have nothing to do with the Bible. Sign number 7, divine dreams and visions. But of course, it was a dream, child, said Aslan. That doesn't make it any less real. God may reveal to you through dreams and visions that he has called you. For example, you may dream that you are leading a large audience or guiding a group in prayer and worship. These dreams are an indication that God is calling you to his service. You may also regularly find yourself dreaming of men of God speaking to you, which means that the Spirit of God is ministering to you. Or you may even dream of celestial visitations or see yourself performing miracles in dreams. These are signs that God has chosen you. We often wonder why we dream of this or that. Perhaps it is just something in our minds. But is it really? It is not difficult for God to communicate with us in such moments, because it is during sleep that we are in a more peaceful state. Our body rests while our mind continues to work. Do not ignore these signs. God is showing you your path as his child, which is very important. Sign number 8, intolerance to injustice. Lewis states in his book, Mere Christianity, justice and only justice must always be our motive, and mercy should only play a part in punishment, and in this way try to restore the broken order to its true course. When God calls you, it will provoke in you an intolerance to injustice and wrongdoing. With such conviction, you will feel compelled to stand against evil. In many cases, God will want you to advocate for others who cannot do so themselves. This will involve supporting those who have no voice or confronting those who oppress. You will be driven by a desire to protect and defend those who cannot fight for themselves. You may even take risks to defend the cause of justice and oppose oppression. As you become a servant of God, you develop a very strong sense of justice because you see the world differently from others. Things you once thought were right now no longer make sense to you, and recognizing this changes the way you act in certain situations. Especially when faced with evil, you understand that the evil in the world cannot be completely defeated, but each one doing their part can make the world a better place to live our lives. Sign number 9, you will be conscious of God. Screwtape says in one of his letters, he lives all the time in the presence of God. He is putting all his actions under the gaze of an all-powerful being. He is trying, at every moment, to conform to the will of this being. One of the crucial ways to know that God has called you is that you will become very conscious of God. You will constantly feel God's presence within yourself and in everything you do, always considering God's opinion on situations. This means that you will no longer act independently as you did before. You will always be aware of God's presence in your life and will seek to align your thoughts and actions with his will. You will care less about your own desires and more about doing what is right in the eyes of God. You will carefully analyze your options and consider how each choice aligns with God's plan for your life. You will also notice that your relationships with others are positively impacted as you strive to be more kind, compassionate, and just as God desires you to be. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy our videos, please subscribe to our channel. Subscribe to our channel. Subscribe to